Welcome to our very special Halloween episode. Today we are happy to present Jack Grayle, a wonderfully charming and enthusiastic teacher of the Blackthorn School, practitioner of various magics from the sorceries of the Greek Magical Papyri to early modern Cunning Craft, author of the Hekatæon and the Golden Guest, an essay featured in Hadean's Conjure Codex Volume 4. Today we will discuss a whole host of topics ranging from Jack's understanding of Hellenic magical praxis, dream incubation, visionary experiences, the use of the Marigold as a potent materia in our magic, the Virgin Mary, the nature of sorcerous compulsion, and much more. If you enjoy this sort of conversation on the arts of the occult and the esoteric, then please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. We are very grateful for every little thing that you can do to help us grow and reach a wider audience. I am your host, Matt Hadfield, and I am honoured to welcome Jack Grayle to the Hadean Press podcast. Jack, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'm so pleased to be here with you.
For our listeners, could you introduce yourself and describe something of what drew you to the art and practice of magic?
Absolutely. My name is Jack Grayle, and I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, an amateur, a dilettante, and a magical exhibitionist, if ever there was one. I'm a former actor, director, and I love magic, I love writing, I love creativity, I love performance, and I love those who love those things. And I myself have written a book on magic called the Hekatæon, which has been translated into several languages, including a pirate version in Russian that I'm desperate to get my hands on, as well as a full-length theatrical play in iambic pentameter named Sigrid and the Mist, which came out and was named second best occult book of 2024, by Denis Poisson. And I also am in the process of publishing this fall a book that I'll sell for charity's sake, a noir mystery taking place in the 1920s, which is called Ghost Bride. Well, I'm very excited for that to come out. And I teach classes in magic and publish books through my imprint, Grayle Publishing, and also Araxes Publishing with my friend Larry Roberts of Miskatonic Books. And I teach classes through the Blackthorn School on magic, Hekate, the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri, and obscure and elucidating topics like that. So that's my CV, such as it is. And it wouldn't get me hired at a Starbucks, but somehow it makes me decent company for those equally weird and strange and beautiful people that tolerate my presence, Matt. And to that group, I include you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that is a wonderful CV. But what was it that specifically brought you into magic? Did you have a moment in your youth that inspired something in you, or turned you on in some way to the practice and the art of magic?
Well, I was brought up Catholic, and Catholicism is very much a magical practice if you look at it. It has a necromantic vein in the cult of the saints. It has many sacramentals, which are remnants of magical praxis. It has an initiation rite, and it has, a whole hierarchy of angelic and archangelic and saints, which are the restless dead mostly, as well as a hypercosmic being. So growing up in that tradition, I was exposed to a lot of the ideas which are the founding principles of ancient magic. But I was brought up in sort of the acoustic guitar and wall-to-wall carpet version of Roman Catholicism. So, very an unmagical version of this magical religion. But it allowed me just enough leeway to imagine what could be. And I grew up as I grew up with a certain hunger for things that were non-mediated experience of the divine, a direct experience of the mystic. And so I hunted out those experiences once I had an opportunity to. And I found the closest version of them I could in ancient magic and pagan systems and traditional um, systems of coercive, comedic sorcery. And so those were sort of my route of ingress, my door into the worlds of magic and mysticism, as as Yeats is attributed to saying, there is another world, but it is in this one. And I spent much of the early part of my life looking for that other world until eventually, of course, finding it in this one.
So I took your course on the PGM maybe 5 years ago now. I think I was part of the second cycle. And I remember at the time being just so impressed by the level of expertise and research that you must have put into creating that course for everybody. It was truly wonderful, and yeah, I found so much inspiration in it. Could you tell our audience a little bit about what led you to decide to become a teacher?
Well, sure. It was a desire to learn because the dirty secret of teaching, as you yourself know, as a teacher, is that when we teach a class to others, the person that learns the most is ourselves. And there's no better way to learn your own material than to try to teach it to other people because it requires you to condense it and distill it and communicate it. And it's one thing to read it silently and think you understand it, but once you have to articulate the principles and the praxis of it, then sometimes you understand for the first time your own material as the words are leaving your lips. And you think to yourself, oh my God, I didn't know I knew that. Or really? And sometimes at its weirdest in teaching, it feels like something is almost speaking through you. It becomes almost an experience of channeling when it's really clicking along, as much as if you were in a ritual aspecting a deity. And that's something I realized early on. I started teaching out of enthusiasm for the texts, which, as you know, are called the Greco-Egyptian Magical Papyri, a set of magical spells discovered presumably in a tomb in Thebes and dating back almost 2 millennia. And what's exciting about them is that they're not works about magic, but they are actually works of magic, actual spells as practiced by working magicians, which were probably scribes and priests from Egyptian religion in the years 100, 200, 300 AD. And so when we look at them, we see magic not as it was considered by philosophers, scholars, or writers, but as it was practiced in the streets by working magicians in Roman Egypt about 1700 years ago. And it's an enormous privilege to look at material like that and think this is the actual words that were spoken by actual magicians for actual clients who are afraid of being convicted or bankrupt or sickened or chased off or losing their business or losing their love or losing their health or losing their lives. These spells were meant to aid people at a time when magic was illegal. The Roman Empire made the practice of sorcery illegal even before Christianity. And so the practitioners of this dark art would have been burned alive for practicing it, and their clients would have been crucified if convicted of it. So there's an enormous risk. When you read these spells, there's a great sense of privilege reading them to think these were spells concocted by people who took their life in their hands to offer service to people on the margins of society, to allow them some modicum of hope and to help transform their lives for the better, people who are often in desperate straits, dire conditions, willing to risk crucifixion in order to improve their fate. So my obsession with these ancient texts led me to offer to teach it. And in teaching it, I came to understand them better, which was important because when you first approach them, they're absolutely bizarre. They don't seem to abide by the normal rules of religion that we're familiar with. If you grow up, in the West under Orthodox religion, as I did, where spiritual experience is mostly apologizing to a higher deity, begging for forgiveness, and then trusting that some mediator, like a priest, will intervene between you and God to make peace between you. And ancient magic is the opposite of all of those. Instead of apologizing, you declare your worthiness and your purity. Instead of begging, you announce what will happen through coercive, forceful, declaratory magic. And instead of requiring a mediator to do the thing between you and the deity, you step into the shoes of the deity. You take on the mantle of the deity. You mask yourself in the deity. You speak as the deity. You conjure the deity. And the deity appears through you and accomplishes through your mouth and your hands and your heart and your body the thing that must be done. You unbecome yourself and you become the other. And that other is either the ghost or the god or the daimon or the demon or the being that you wish to inhabit and to be inhabited by. So there's a performative element too. And because I grew up in the theater performing roles in Shakespeare and other plays, I immediately understood that this idea of masking, it's both to lose yourself and become your truest self, and that there's a paradox there. But that by announcing I am Anubis, or I am, you know, Helios, or I am Iao, or I am Michael, you allow that power to speak through you. You allow it to become manifest, and you become the vessel and the vehicle and the conduit for the divine, not by begging it to appear and then sitting there hopefully shuddering as it does, by becoming the spokesperson for the divine and allowing yourself to be transformed by it. So it's a transformative experience, adopting this ancient form of magic, and it's thrilling and dangerous and it's bewildering and it's paradoxical, but it's very, very effective and very, very real. And so that was what I wanted to share. And that's what I, discovered as I was talking about it and kind of found out what I already knew, but not consciously as I tried to explain it to others. So that was the motive and that was the result. At least it's what I hope it was.
Mm. And there's something, just something so powerful about stepping into the same role, as you mentioned, as those people who were practicing these things centuries, millennia ago, and now you are in many ways taking up that same mantle of teaching. And whereas in the past we would have had to have kept these things silent and quiet and hidden, today we're thankfully we live in we live in a time in which we can mostly openly share these ideas together and learn from one another. So yeah, truly, I think we're in a golden age of not just studying these things, but also putting all the pieces together and practicing in a way that finally we can grasp something of what was being done in that era, without having to create systems from just pure guesswork. Now we actually have more evidence-backed material to put together.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Like, first of all, there's the knowledge to look at it and say, oh, this is how they did it. But there's a second hurdle, which is doing it.
Mm,
And remarkably, the hurdle is actually a high one because what most people encounter is a terrible sense of imposter syndrome. It's one thing to give them the spell, say, these are the words to say. This is the Stele of Jeu, the headless rite, right? You read these words and it's an exorcism. You purify, you carve out, you like cutting out a cancer from a sick body. You dispel those parasitical powers that diminish you. Just say these words with conviction and authority. And it sounds easy, right? The spell's only a page and a half long. But what many people encounter is this terrible sense of imposter syndrome. They look at it and say, well, wait a minute. We start at the beginning by calling upon this headless one, whatever that means. But by the end of it, the words coming out of the mouth of the ritualist is, I am the headless daimon, right? I am the spirit that I called. And they say, well, wait a minute, I don't feel comfortable about that. Or this other spell that says, I am Thoth, or I am Isis, or I am, I don't feel worthy of that. I only started 3 years ago. I'm an alcoholic. I don't feel like I've achieved total purity. There's other people that know more than me. I don't have a college degree. I'm not initiated. I'm just so and so. And there's a great sense of being unworthy of the material. Once you grasp it, you think, oh, and there's a temptation to back away slowly from it, saying, well, this is more fit for an Egyptian priest to say than for me. And in a way, that's true. It was the work of rogue Egyptian priests working in their off time, we're told, in the back alleys and under the table, doing magical work during the 6 months of the year when they were not employed by the state. But the fact is this, they're gone and they'll never come back. They don't exist anymore. So they no longer can wear this mantle. If these gods are to be honored, if this magic is to be performed, it's you and me that's doing it. And
Mm.
it's true that we're not Kemetic initiated practitioners, but if Hathor is to receive an offering, and if Anubis is to be conjured, and if Isis is to be honored, and if Osiris is to be invoked, then it's us that will do the invoking and the conjuring and the aspecting. And so it requires a certain amount of courage to say, I wasn't born to say these words, but I will say these words. And I wasn't fated to wear this mask, but I will wear this mask.
Mm.
And I wasn't, you know, the original person or who conjured this power and aspected this being, but I will conjure it and I will aspect it because no one else is going to do it if not me. And I desire to be transformed and become closer to these powers, and I desire to draw them closer to me. And if there's one thing we know about the daimonic aspect of these gods, it's that they love to have their names recited. They love to have their deeds recalled. They love to have the offerings made to them. They love to once again take form in the natural world within the slipstream of time and be able to affect events in ways that are consistent with their jurisdiction and their powers and their identity. And by allowing them a vehicle to do so, that vehicle being ourselves, we give them a great gift and we give to ourselves a great gift too, which is to merge with these deities, these beings, and become more than we have been and discover that we can be more than we are going forward. So
Mm.
it's a great discovery for those who allow themselves the luxury of the risk of doing so.
Mm. The way I always put it is, like I think a lot of people are overly concerned with getting everything perfect. So the problem of perfection, having all the right tools ready and everything, the right, all the materia has to be perfect. Everything, every word must be pronounced
Right,
perfectly. No,
right,
just get out and do it. Get out and
right.
get some dirt under your fingernails and try. So
Yeah.
it's
I always thought that I was lucky in that way because I came from a background of a performer, a theatrical performer.
mm,
And a theatrical performer, you can practice and practice and practice. But what you know is on opening night, anything can and will happen. It will be imperfect. Lines will be dropped. Props will be forgotten. The audience can't be predicted. The dynamic will be different than the 8 weeks of rehearsal that preceded it. And so what that allows you to do is say, look, it won't be perfect, but it will be the perfect show for tonight. And I'll give myself
exactly.
100% to it, right? And magic is like that too. People treat it like it's physics, but it's not. It's an art. And just like you can never say that, like, I will never perform this dance unless I've perfectly prepared to do this ballet. Well, you'll never be perfectly prepared. Always one more week of prep would be better than 1 week less. But at some point, you have to pull the trigger and say, I'm going to perform it. And it won't be
Mm,
perfect, but it will be the perfect performance for where I am today, being who I am, being where I am, with the
mm,
resources I have. And magic is like that. You do what you can, but then you just approach it and say, I'm going to swing for the fences and give it all I've got. And if you do that, it will be worthy of you and you of it.
yeah. I was talking to somebody recently about Yapnon for Hekate and when exactly should I do it? What part, when is it exactly this time of the new moon? And I was like, can you see the moon? Is it dark? Get out and do it. You know, just it doesn't matter if you've got the timing perfectly right for that sort of thing. But yeah, it's about getting out and getting your fingers burned at the end of the day, which I think is the most important thing. And that first hurdle takes courage to actually do it.
Yeah.
So you've got to dig deep and be content with what you can accomplish in that moment. And, if things don't go perfectly and if things don't go exactly as you expected, try again, just try again. It's not the end of the world. But yeah, I love the way that you've just described all of that. It's truly phenomenal. The way that you put it, comparing it to putting on a stage play. Yeah, that's a really good analogy. Um, so Jack, we're here today to talk about your contribution specifically to Hadean Press's Conjure Codex, issue number 4, and specifically your essay titled The Golden Guest, as well as your other works and projects, which we can talk about freely. But to begin with, could you tell us a little bit about your essay on Mary's Gold?
Oh, sure. Well, I very much wanted to have an essay accepted by Hadean. And it occurred to me that instead of doing something which I was doing regularly, which is write Hekatæon rituals to honor Hekate or the spiritual and magical systems of late antiquity in which she plays a big role, that I might use something closer to home, And as I mentioned, I was raised Roman Catholic, and one of the most interesting aspects of Roman Catholicism, aside from the cult of the saints, is the cult of Mary, and Mary is really where many, many people, especially in the West, have their first experience of a goddess type figure, since, of course, the Trinity, if you're raised Catholic, is a father, a son, and a ghost. And any family that involves a father and son and a ghost harkens back to a matricide somewhere along the way. And many people feel the absence of that mother goddess figure in that system, but it's mitigated somewhat by the character of Mary, of course, who is both, a human, allegedly, a human spirit, but one who has godlike aspects, being a theocrator, a god mother, a god creator, right? And so I was drawn to a system of magic that would honor her. And the way I decided to do that is to write this spell that conjured through Marian prayers and Marian rites and Marian associations a system of magic that would allow one to have a vision. And so that was what I submitted to Hadean Press. And I'll always be grateful that it was accepted and published in Conjure Codex number 4.
And so, would you like to read the introduction?
Yes, if you'll tolerate it, you and your readers, I'd like to read the first 3 paragraphs just to get them some sense. I will say the materia for the working is the flower, the marigold. And so this is how I introduce the spell in Conjure Codex 4. I'll read from that text 3 paragraphs if you'll allow me. When the prows of the Norman fleet first scraped the shores of Albion around 1000 AD, they brought with them rank upon rank of ruthless, well-organized, and land-hungry warriors who excelled at fighting, taxing, writing laws, building castles. This tide of tyrants came attended by a secondary invasion of goats, geese, pigs, provisions, mead, and men, children, sisters, wives, many who would soon become widowed. And amid the chaos of these unwelcome immigrants came many stowaways, some human and some decidedly not. One of the inhuman stowaways on the Norman fleet was most likely a scattering of Calendula officinalis seeds, only millimeters long, but shaped like Maori fish hooks. The small seeds would have clung to the ankles of dame and dog alike, and were soon scattered about the chalky shores of Essex, from whence they spread, thriving quickly until they, like their hosts, had conquered the better part of the British Isles. Unlike the Normans, however, who proved brutal and humorless overlords, the Calendula invasion was welcomed by the Britons, who found the plucky, bright flower both cheerful and useful, tough and hardy. It bloomed through every month of the year, but inspiring when it converted gray fields to gold. Peasants and priests alike noted how the flower opened at dawn, slowly swiveling its bloom throughout the day, so that the gilded petals followed the sun upon its journey. On holy days, cunning folk gathered its flower for its medicinal effects, which were many. Not only did it repel insects, but a distillation of the bloom's virtue was found to calm heart palpitations and mitigate menstrual ache, while a salve made from its essence soothed sunburn, healed skin lesions, and numbed nipples sore from nursing. As a sign of their regard for the benevolent transplant, the Britons dubbed it Mary's Gold, or Marigold, after Mary, the Virgin Mother of Jesus, and a folk tradition arose around it to the effect that the Virgin had pinned to her breast the golden flower as a symbol of her love for the father of her son. Over time, as the cult of Mary grew, so too did the flower's reputation, and eventually its advantages included the spiritual as well as the medicinal. A blossom kept in the left-hand pocket of one's trousers brought luck in love and law, and those who devoured the edible blooms might soon thereafter glimpse the fair folk. These traditions continued on in subtle strains of folk tradition to the current day, and the scientific benefits of the flower continue unabated, as over 200 medical treatments now contain marigold extracts.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you so much for reading that out. And it answers several of my next questions. But I would like to hear exactly how you would put it. So, you already mentioned like cunning folk and the way that it was used in medicine and that. But does the marigold itself have any other mythic or legendary qualities to its virtues that predate its arrival on shores of Great Britain?
Well, I think the thing that needs to be recognized, so much of magic focuses on toxic blooms and flowers that can create, intoxicated states and are poisonous. And, those are extremely sexy in all the ways. But marigold is a solar flower, obviously. It literally follows the sun like the sunflower. And because of that, and its beautiful gold color, and there's something about it that seems just inherently beautiful, full of life, warmth, bright, enlivening, enheartening, encouraging, ensouling, purifying, and sustaining. And so the idea is to write a ritual which incorporates the petals of a marigold in a way that are consistent with the solar cult, which is what for instance, Christianity was, it overlapped with that. And to allow for that flowers, leaves to call upon both Mary and the angel Gabriel and the powers of announcement and annunciation and vision and spirit coercion, which is sort of inherent in that system. And so it was an attempt to harness that solar power in a way that had a sort of a magical and a spiritual, lightly ceremonial function.
I think it's Albertus Magnus calls it heliotrope, and um, he uh, he lumps it together with the stone of the same name, and describes an early scientific method of releasing heat by placing it in a bowl of water, and apparently the steam that arises from this mixture has the quality of blotting out the light of the sun, which is quite
Oh,
interesting.
oh,
Presumably being like a release of cloud or a release of vapor, which turns the sun red in color and quality. But it has this consistent link to the nature of the sun and to heat and distribution, which I think is really interesting. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Um,
oh, yeah, no problem. And it was, the spell itself was meant to incorporate some of the magical techniques found in the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri,
mm,
and reflected to a degree in ceremonial magic of the Renaissance and such. But the spell itself, simple as it is, involves techniques such as a god face, where you take on the identity of a holy being, and coercive power, where you recite, magical voices or ritual texts, or references to a success narrative where you talk about a tale that's relevant to the element itself to sort of make it recognize its own function in myth and legend and mythopoetic reality, and
Mm.
encourage it to sort of cross the boundary from the legendary world to the mundane one and take effect in it. And of course, a poetic element as well. The conjuration of the flower itself, I just found it, if you don't mind. It's quite short, but it reads, Marigold, O summer's bride, whose gaze makes drunk the dreamer, flower favored by the maid who bore God like a fever, ever turning to behold him as he rolled across the ether. Caltha was your name before his flame erased your pleasure. O Marigold, instill in me your hunger and your leisure. O Marigold, reveal to me the source of my true treasure. And so by reciting this, the idea was that the ritualist could have a vision of treasure. And there are lots of treasure finding rituals in ceremonial magical text and folk magic text, but this was obviously meant to create a vision of a treasure that was relevant to the system being invoked, which is, of course, a transcendent one. And so the idea was that the practitioner might encounter a vision of their true treasure, which perhaps went beyond the dollars and cents that they may have in their bank account, or the nearest, the nearest stash of coins beneath the couch, and reveal to them what is most precious in their lives. And that was the
Mm.
the idea anyway.
Yes, I was going to ask you about the nature of dream incubation because there is a specific quality of that in this spell. And then as well as that, the idea that to discover treasure, how literal do we take that when we read these texts? And even if, say, in like the medieval grimoires, there's a lot of treasure magic in there that they were probably quite literal. They literally meant finding gold. But we have that ability to reinterpret, I think, which is quite important.
It is. And I read a very interesting book about the cunning folk, which talks about spiritual experiences in Britain by those who claim to have had an encounter with the devil or an angel or the dead or an animal familiar that gave them a gift, right? And very often these visions come at a time when they're in extremis, like that shamanic experience of having some sort of break or physical crisis out of which comes a vision. These people too were often suffering from extreme hunger or disease or loss, bereavement, and they have this vision. And the vision lends itself to a being who asks them, as Wendy asked Peter Pan, "Why are you crying?" And they tell them why. And then the spirit engages with them, and the spirit gives them a gift, and the gift is the spirit's own company and knowledge. But what inevitably comes out of that alliance with the god, the ghost, the devil, the angel, the good folk, is the ability, soon recognized by the community of the person, to communicate with the divine, either through divinatory work or creating amulets or talismans or doing blessings or exorcisms, or being able to spiritually mediate. And that gift becomes, in essence, um, a means by which the person may sustain themselves. So if they were in hunger, or if they were on the point of famine or bankruptcy or incarceration, they're then afforded the ability to achieve security through the alliance with this spirit. And the spirit, the true treasure, isn't just the money that they may receive. The treasure is the alliance with the power. And
Mm.
that alliance came because the crack in their reality caused by the crisis that was encountered, the death of their child, the point of starvation, the illness that nearly killed them, the husband that left them, the sense of being raw and at the very knife's edge of life. And any of us who have felt that experience, who have been walking the streets alone as night fell, thinking that I don't have a dime in my pocket. I'm far from home. I have no means of reaching anyone I know, and it's on me to survive this night, knows that they enter into a mythic state where everything and everyone they encounter has an outsized importance. And they enter the woods, so to speak, even if they're in the heart of the city, and they experience something that's much more akin to a fairy tale or folk tale than a normal encounter by a mundane person with a cell phone and a credit card in their pocket. And so, magic is always the last resort of people who are marginalized and on the edge, unless it comes in a society like the Egyptians, where it's integrated at the deepest levels with their religion. So, but nowadays, if people like you and I experience it truly, it's because we've pushed ourselves or taken a great risk or gone either through fortune, fate, or determination to discover that treasure that the other world offers us if we'll only step through the threshold and take on the risk and the danger of experiencing the unknown.
Yes, the ordeal.
The ordeal. Right,
Yeah, yeah,
right.
coming close to whatever, that dark night of the soul sort of, coming close to absolute destitution, coming close to death even, it's like a catabasis, right? You're descending in a way into
Yeah,
another world and then
yeah.
returning, and that act of descending and returning, when you return finally, you have been, completely changed. And that is something that, as a magical experience, it's something that I believe you have to undergo, and it's unique to each of us as we undergo it. But what's important is, once you've returned, you bring that something else back with you. That, as you mentioned, that ability to mediate, and to effectuate. But yeah, fascinating, fascinating. So I found that the dream incubation spells work really well if the sorcerer undergoes a unique experience of some kind prior to sleep. So, for instance, if you have never committed to an act of magic before, and you were to, say, go out at a specific time, with specific materia into the woods, at a crossroads, and do something that's a really novel experience. It's something maybe that you've never experienced before, and so you are sort of you're more likely to have uh, a vivid dream event after we go through an activity, after we perform such a thing. Um, so yeah, it's like the combinations of action taken while creating an environment outside of the mundane, in which we can find that silence and that presence of mind to engage with the spirits. But how do you yourself prepare for such engagements? And once you've already sort of, I don't want to say become numb to, but once you've already experienced these sort of novel, uh, magical or sorcerous experiences, how do you keep that that ability to return to those sort of dream states?
That's a good question, Matt. And you know as well as I do, everyone has to find their own internal equilibrium. I will say, I will say that when it comes to, oneiromancy, let's call it, the magic of dreams, dreaming is a skill like any other, and some people have it and some don't. And it can be developed, but to some it comes quite naturally, vivid visionary dreams, and to others it's so hard to do. Our dreams are mundane or hard to remember or whatever. But like any other muscle, it improves, with practice. And there's many instructions on how to do that, especially keeping track of your dreams and whatnot. But I really like what you said about what you do beforehand has an effect. And if you move outside your normal routine, you're more likely to have an extra normal experience in your sleep. Many of us, understandably, try to carve out for ourselves the most comfortable as possible daily routine, the most comfortable possible places, doing the most comfortable possible things, eating the most comfortable possible foods. And, just going from the television to the refrigerator to our phones, and who can blame us? Often we work hard and life is full of uncertainties. So when we're home, we deserve to be as comfortable as we can afford to be. But often, if you want to have a vision, I agree with you entirely. It makes sense. I mean, obviously, there has to be a ritual of some sort to, even if it's extremely simple, to request to have a contact by a spirit, in a dream. But I really appreciate what you say, that it helps to step outside your normal routine, which is surprisingly hard. It's surprisingly hard to say every night I do X, Y, Z, but tonight I will do A, B, and C. It's almost like there's a force, like a hand around your neck saying, no, no, just watch the TV, just pick up your phone, just eat the same meal, just do the same thing. And to defy that, to step outside that rut, that habit, that pattern, it really requires some determination. And if you allow yourself to take, say, a night walk in a park, or to circle the block in the city you live in at dusk, or even just to sit outside and look at the city as sunset falls, as opposed to watching television, if you allow yourself some moment where you break the pattern of comfort and habit, then you open a window. It's sort of like tearing a muscle when you exercise for the first time. It allows, in that rent of habit, it allows the super mundane to come through. And I think the odds of having some sort of extraordinary experience, either in dream or meditation or ritual work, are far more likely if you allow yourself to break through that pattern of habit and comfort that many of us spend so much of our time seeking out, and establishing. And it's tricky, but it's like starting to work out. It requires you to get up earlier, to go somewhere you don't normally go, to experiencing something you don't normally do. And I say that as someone who despises working out and is absolutely anathema to my very nature. I'm by nature lazy and a creature of habit, and I seek out comfort at every level. And even the smallest amounts of discomfort seem astonishing martyrdom to me. So to actually say, you know what, it's winter, but I want to take a walk in this park and walk through the woods and look at the half moon through the bare tree branches and, just sort of breathe in the cold air and let that inform my sleep tonight and my prayer that I be approached by a power, that itself is far more likely to have effect than simple, wishful thinking would.
Mm. So when we work with the medieval grimoires, in many cases, or most cases, you find instruction to purify the self and sort of distance yourself from the mundane for a period of time. So the Grimoire and Verum gives us like 3 days. Other documents suggest a week, um, or longer. And it's in those periods of time where I think when we disconnected from the mundane, from the pattern that we're used to, the comfort, and we're also fasting as well. And fasting itself can be very difficult if you're used to, just like you said, the comforts of modern daily life. That idea of saying, well, now I'm only going to eat this very restricted diet. I'm only going to drink water, and then over that period of time, over those 3 days or that one week, you slowly reduce it, and you spend your time in prayer, in meditation. Then it brings you to that state of being gently over a period of time. And I feel like even myself, having done this many, many times, just going through that process, your dreams immediately just kick off and become far more vivid, and even you can even engage with them to a degree at some point. But yeah, so how about you personally? Do you, in your magic, do you set a period of time to one side to consecrate or purify yourself prior to magical work? And do you recommend that sort of thing?
I should, but I don't. And if I were to recommend it, I'd be the a height of hypocrisy. I do believe that it's enormously efficacious, and we know that because the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri say that, a period of purity beforehand is very important. And it says sexual purity is the most important. And I think, you can come up with all kinds of reasons for that. It normally, when I talk to people about those requirements, people bridle and buckle. And there's the theoretical objections. Well, I'm sex positive, or well, I'm blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, right, I agree with you too. But it says what it says. And then there's the practical considerations. Oftentimes, this work was being practiced by people that were either priests, or deacons, or people that were, if it's, depending on what's ancient magic or Renaissance magic, these were literate people who were often, lived lives that allowed for that. They also had different routines than we did, different access to food and different things like that. It's enormously hard for a mother of three to say, well, I'm going to practice this spell, but for the 3 days prior, I won't eat meat and I won't drink anything but water, and I'll eat less and less when she works 9 to 5 and is taking care of kids and has a husband who expects, for, meal on the table and all that. Quite difficult for that person to oblige by that. So there's a great temptation looking at these, recommendations in the spell to say, well, this isn't for me then. I won't do it. But what I've personally noticed, and from the work of my students and all, the spells work on their own terms. They work on their own power. And I think, in my opinion, the requirements and the strictures that are laid down often in the preamble to these spells are sort of to be considered best practices, where if you had all means available to you, and if it were possible, and if you had, the discretion to do so, then this would be the best way to do it. However, life is suboptimal, you know, and anyone who's a performer or who raises kids or who has a relationship or who does a job knows that we're often winging it. We're often doing it with only 35% of the prep we should have, and only 45% of the sleep, and only 50% of the resources, and only 60% of the prep. And we're winging it, but somehow we pull it together. Somehow we manage to get our kids to school. Somehow we don't get fired at the end of the day. Somehow we manage the web of relationships and obligations we have, even with just, a fraction of the resources, the research, and the effort that are optimal to maintain those things. And magic is no different. You can put on ideally, a production of Hamlet would take 9 weeks to put on, but you can put on a production of Hamlet in 5 weeks, right? It just means you have to be really intense and work hard. And magic is the same way. I think magic is ideal if you can take a period of purity ahead of time, reducing your intake, purification, whatever. But I entirely believe you can have effective magical ritual performing it sort of on the fly with very
Mm,
little prep, because all people are not equal. And as you know, just with performance of a creative art, performance of a magical art is a combination not only of the effort you put in, but your internal spiritual resources, your dedication to the rite, the circumstances surrounding the performance of it, your personal fate or destiny, your guides and guards and gods, and how they aid you, and your creativity and ingenuity, and your willingness to take a risk, and your audaciousness. And I think that word is actually more important than your prep or purity. And
mm,
so it may well be, if you eat a hamburger at 3 p.m. and perform a rite at 6 p.m. and think, you know what, that would really didn't go well. My stomach was rumbling the whole time. Well, you've learned something, but it was worth doing, right? But it could also be the doing a working on the fly with a fierce intention that this will work. Then
mm,
that supersedes what you've eaten or what you did the night before or
mm,
anything like that, or whether you took a bath in hyssop within the last
mm,
45 minutes. Ultimately, in the terms of ancient magic, as you know, you step into the shoes of the creator god. You are Thoth. You are Iao. You are Pre. You are Ra. You are the one who brings forth the thing that must be. And you do it by your words, like Thoth did. You declare that which is. Like Heka, you raise your hands and conjure into existence a new reality. And you become, in micro, what the god is in macro. You become a reflection of that power, an embodiment of it. You aspect of it, and you bring the thing to be. And that requires an enormous amount of audaciousness.
mm,
And, so I would say, ideally, if you can come as pure, clean, and sort of intentional to the working as possible, then that's ideal. But
mm,
even more ideal than that is coming determined, audacious, and, you know, with the affirmation internally that you're going to fake it till you make it. And even if you don't feel like you are Thoth or Ra or Prey, and who is, you're going to don that mantle and adopt that mask and say those words and make a change in your life for the better, or the life of you or someone you care about,
mm,
and do the magic as it must be done under the conditions available to you. And that's far more important than following to the letter some stricture written by someone 500 or 2,000 years ago who lived an entirely different life than you did.
mm.
So,
So my advice for my students is always, instead of being quite literal about the act of purification and fasting, it as to the word of the letter from the text, we can we can think about it in a modern context. So, just use social media less, or have a detox from that, turn off the computer. Don't watch TV for a
yeah.
day, you know, or three. Um, Limit yourselves in other ways which are possible, and instead of punishing or feeling like you're punishing yourself, because I think a lot of the time, people are like, well, I have a dietary condition, or these things. They make it kind of, it becomes quite difficult when we take all of these modern things into consideration. So for me personally, it's always been about like, well, what can you do? You don't have to be perfect in accomplishing it as per the letter of the text, but as long as you have some level of like we said before, like separating yourself from the mundane, as long as there's been some effort put into that, I think it's worth it.
Those are especially good examples because both television and social media require on us to be in a passive state, scrolling. They're entirely fashioned by people who are experts in reducing us to sort of a passive consumerist mindset. And magic is the opposite of that. Magic, like art, requires reserves and creativity, audaciousness, the
Mm,
willingness to act, a certain bravado, a daring. And that's a very active attitude. So I agree with you 100%. Of course, they don't in the Renaissance grimoire say don't scroll through Facebook for 90 minutes before doing a ritual. They didn't have it. But I
mhm,
would say that's even more important than taking a bath in hyssop because it requires a state of mind that's active, intelligent, bold, and not sort of stunned by
yeah.
media reducing us to sort of a receptive, passive, consumerist mindset. So I think that's great advice, Matt. And I would
Mm,
say that anyone, even if you can't, go without food for 3 days or that sort of thing, to say spend the day leading up to a ritual, minimizing or hopefully eschewing anything like that that reduces us to a passive consumerist mindset is far
mm,
more efficacious than simply eating less meat.
yeah, I agree. I agree. I love the right that you've constructed for this essay, as it draws on so many different historical sources, but it's still like a very unique structure for the spell itself. You use location, myth, time. You use materia in the flower petals. There's a necromantic object, Bible verses, barbarous words, an angelic seal, and all of these things are woven together um, into this like really this wonderful foundation for this spell that you've created. How do you go about constructing these kind of spells, these well unique spells? I mean, how do you know that the pieces of the puzzle that you've put together are going to function in a specific way?
You know, I don't, and it's as you know, it's my magical vocabulary is informed by the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri. And there's probably 24 tactics or strategy of creating magic in those texts, which are modular, which can be applied not just to ancient magic, to modern ones as well, and many of which appear in Arabic sorcery, Renaissance sorcery, 19th century sorcery, and they really are techniques which are they're not reflected in New Age magic, which often reflects an entirely different mindset, but traditional magical techniques involve, for instance, declaring yourself to be a god in order to aspect a god. It involves calling upon a god, conjuring them by their epithets. It involves naming their associations, reciting their narrative, their legend. It involves calling out magical voices or magical formulae that are associated with them or adjacent to them. It involves success narratives or threat narratives. It involves using materia that's relevant to the deity. For instance, gold for the sun, or a sunflower, or a marigold for solar powers, or lunar flowers, minerals, incense, essences for lunar powers. It could involve astrological timing or solar or lunar timing. It could involve dressing oneself in a certain way or picking a certain location that's redolent of the power to be invoked. It could involve reciting a narrative that's, that excites the power. Above all, it could involve use calling upon the dead or conjuring hierarchies of power in which a lower spirit does the wet work while a higher spirit manages them and follows them. It can involve a reciprocal relationship where you say, I will give you this if you give me that. It can involve a divinatory action to where you request a favor and then look to the signs and see whether there's a sign that your offer has been accepted, as in time magic, where they may light a candle in a cemetery and call upon a dead spirit. And if the candle blows out, that's a no. And if the candle flares brighter, it's a yes. And so they allow the spirit to speak for itself through objective phenomenon. So it's more of a conversation than a monologue. And all these things, and that's just a fraction of the magical techniques, but all of these are tried and true techniques that occur not only in Greco-Egyptian magic, but can be found remarkably in Southeastern Asian magic, in South American magic, in Arabic magic, and North African magic, in Renaissance magic. It's remarkably universal, these techniques. And so when I wrote this simple spell, this conjuration of Mary and Marian powers, I used some of those in order to mimic. So, for instance, in the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri, you might say, I am Thoth, I am the uncle of Isis. I brought forth all things by my voice, that which I spoke came to be. And then you might conjure a god having declared yourself to be Thoth, right? But in this spell, because of course Thoth would have no role in a Marian spell, I have the practitioner recite the Magnificat, which in the Bible is the prayer Mary says after she's been informed that she will bear the child of God, that she'll become basically the consort of God. And it begins, as most Christians will remember, my soul magnifies the Lord, and my spirit rejoices in God my Savior, because he has regarded the lowliness of his handmaid. For behold, henceforth all generations shall call me blessed. So in reciting that, the magical practitioner takes on the quote God face of Mary, undergoes what an academic might call theosis, which is where you declare yourself to be a divine and conflate yourself with a spiritual power. And by reciting that, you sort of step into the mantle of Mary, allow her words to come through your mouth, and assume some of her authority. And as a mother of God, Mary in the Christian system would have quite a bit of authority over lower spirits, of course. And there
Mm.
was an old tradition that nothing banished the devil quicker than calling upon Mary because he couldn't bear her. She was too pure for to be in his presence.
She's also considered the Empress of Hell?
Oh, yes, right. There's that tradition, right? That it in some ways it mirrors that concept that the moon and the sun traveled when they crossed below the horizon into the underworld, and they brought comfort to the dead. There was supposed to be a subterranean sun that briefly lit the world of the dead. And in the Greco-Egyptian magical papyri, they talk about Selene traversing the underworld and breaking the bonds of the dead while she was, presumably so they could briefly remember themselves and have brief periods of agency while she was illuminating their world before leaving it and leaving them once again in darkness. So
Mm.
I have a feeling that the Marian idea that she's Empress of the Dead comes out of that sense of her mercy, which is available even to those that have been damned and gone to hell.
I love that spell. But while we're on this subject, how do you personally approach the art of necromancy?
You know, what's interesting, Matt, and I think you probably agree with this, is in the West, there's such, at least in contemporary systems, necromancy has such a heavy metal vibe to it and such a dark, do the horns with your hand and put on your death metal and put on your black shirt and you're so, quote, evil and hardcore performing necromancy. But really, necromancy is simply speaking to a person. It's engaging in a relationship with a person, and that person happens to have died. But the idea being that there's someone who died and is available to someone who's of the living. And for that reason, I think the logic of it is that it's far easier to communicate with someone who was once a person like you or me than it is to a being that never was and never will be. And the idea that a spirit like that, especially a spirit that died under surprising circumstances, perhaps young, perhaps violently, perhaps before they lived a full life, might feel cheated as we would, perhaps, if our lives ended today. And this sense that they still hunger for something of this beautiful world, and the idea that we can offer to them a chance to experience agency in the world again, to say to them, your song is not sung, your tale is not told. I appear here where you died or by your grave or whatever. There's no one else here but me, and I have something to offer you. I offer you a chance to be active again in the world. I say your name. I burn this incense. I pour out this drink. I need your help. I call upon a power, and I would have you be my helper, and I would be yours. And I invite you to once again be active in the natural world, in the living world, and to allow that spirit perhaps a chance, to accept or decline the offer. And something like that, I think, is an enormously healthy thing to do. And I think anytime you're trying to form a relationship that's reciprocal, it's a beautiful and very human thing. And so, despite the fact that the word necromancy and the ideas behind it seem enormously, transgressive in today's world, people forget what is the cult of the saints in Catholicism but necromancy? The idea that there are first, second, and third level relics, those which look like the saint, those which touched the corpse of the saint, and those which are a piece of the corpse of a saint. And each one has a greater opportunity for invoking the power of the saint. And through prayers and discussions, you can engage with that power and get it to intervene in your life. That's necromancy, though no one calls it such. And
Mhm.
even for instance, in Latin American countries, conjuring your ancestors with flowers and pictures and speaking to them and inviting them at least once a year to join you and feast upon food and bless your family. That's a form of necromancy too. And anyone who has a picture of a beloved, grandparent or parent on the wall or close friend who speaks to it, who perhaps lights a candle once a year, who wishes it well and asks for its blessing. That's a form of necromancy too. The more formalized kinds, where you invoke a mediating spirit like Anubis or Hekate or Skirlin or something, and ask it to do the wet work of drawing forth the power. Those are formal systems based on different cultures, and it's reasonable to ask a spirit of the dead to call forth a being who lives within the dead. That's just sort of natural to ask for an intermediary to help make the contact. But the actual communication, I think, is enormously healthy and human thing. And especially in America, where we're largely in denial about death, unless you're in the death industry, where we don't like to look upon the dead or have open casket funerals or say final farewell to them or visit their graves or even go for a walk in a cemetery. It's actually a bracing corrective to be able to go to a tomb or a death site and say, I call upon you by your name. You're not forgotten. I say your name. I invite you here. I pour out this drink for you. I light this candle. I invite you to be here with me and hear these words that I speak and to form a relationship with me as I want to have one with you.
Mm,
I see nothing transgressive about that other than it runs contra to the tides in our current culture, at least mine, where once the dead are dead, they're meant to be forgotten immediately.
mm. So one of the biggest things that I love about having a Japanese family living in Japan um, is the proximity of death that we experience each year.
Oh, really?
And even a Japanese funeral, perhaps you don't know, but everyone is cremated in Japan. And when the cremation is finished, or while the cremation is occurring, everybody feasts. And
Really?
when the cremation is completed, the family, the closest members of the family gather around the remains, and we use chopsticks and we pick up each bone in order and place them into an urn. Ending
What?
with the skull cap. The final bone is the top of the skull, which is placed on top. And prior to that is a small bone in the throat, which from a specific angle resembles the Buddha sitting in a lotus position. And the Buddha it's meant to be the location of the voice, which is also the location of the soul. That's where the soul emanates from. Um, and so then we have that experience even with our pets. We lost the family dog and we did it with the dog. So
Oh my God.
you have that intimacy with the deceased, but you also spend that time, you're not maybe like the Greeks, would have wailed at the dead, when during the funeral process. But a Japanese funeral is very austere, and yeah, there might be some crying and that, but it's not necessarily like tearing your clothes and ripping your hair out sort of thing. But then every year, on August 5th, we have a celebration called Obon, where we light a fire in the driveway or in the garden, and we invite the spirits of the ancestors of the dead to come back to the house. And we
Oh,
feast. We feast together. And we even have it's called a butsudan. It's like a gravestone or a grave area in the house. So it's like a specific location
what?
where we communicate with our deceased. We
Oh
burn
my.
incense, we leave offerings, and this is just normal life. And it's just accepted that this is the way that we are and we behave. It's a natural, healthy part of culture. And I think in the West, like you mentioned, we're so divorced from this. It it's almost like you said, we try to forget about it once somebody has passed on. But for the Japanese, it's very much that while living relatives are still alive, you will be remembering all of your other previous ancestors who have gone before you, because you every year we invite them back to eat with them. It's pretty funny actually. I think they return. Oh, sorry, they return to the house on a cucumber that we stick chopsticks into as legs, and it's meant to be a spirit horse. And then when they go back, they return. We send them off with an aubergine, with an eggplant, and send them back on their way. And it's just lovely. It's a joyful experience. It's not Nobody's miserable during these events.
Matt, that you have just blown my mind. I didn't know any of this. It's absolutely incredible. What a beautiful, inspiring, healthy, mature practice that is. That absolutely astonishes me. How
And
incredible. How
um,
absolutely incredible.
we also spend time doing what's called ohakamairi, where we go to a grave area, a gravestone, and we clean it completely. We burn incense, leave offerings, and I think you might recognize this, but specifically we pour water over the name of
Oh, do you really?
the
Yeah.
over the of the
Yeah.
name of the deceased. And what's really interesting as well is that the deceased changes their name on death to prevent a necromancer from conjuring their shade. So the
What?
name on the stone is different from the name that they went by during life.
Are you kidding me?
but it's that same technology of pouring water through the grooves over the stone that animates the spirit and brings it closer. And then you pray and you say, you know, on August the 5th, we're going to have this party and these people are coming. Why don't you join us?
What a beautiful tradition. I had no idea. And yeah, as you know, that in ancient Egypt too, they would have steles of the gods, particularly Horus, holding say snakes and a scorpion, exerting dominance over them. And people, women, mothers especially, would pour water over the image and it would come down and funnel out the bottom, and they would catch it in a pot and take it home, and that water would be sacred because it had poured over the image of Horus and therefore was blessed water, protective water, healing water. And that idea of washing the graves of the dead and inviting them to a celebration at home, absolutely beautiful. That is Wow, that is absolutely remarkable. And I should clarify too, when I talk about attitudes toward the dead in America, I'm usually talking about white middle class attitudes, because if you in Black communities or Latin American communities or that you still see Asian communities very much a different attitude toward the deceased that involves a much closer contact and a much more tactile relationship with them. So boy, that you've just blown my mind. What a beautiful tradition.
Mm, mm, yeah. There's another tradition as well of we call it the specific I don't know, it's not saint, but or Buddhist monk, but the we have the Ojizo-sama. And maybe when you've seen pictures of Japan or you've even traveled to Japan, you've seen these little stone figurines with little red hats and little aprons, little red aprons. Each one of those represents a deceased child. And together with the Ojizo-sama, they're the only spiritual entities or spiritual creatures in Japan that can traverse every realm.
Really?
And so you often go to these locations to pray for your children or to pray for children, but you can also pray for pregnancy and the whole
Wow.
spectrum of childbirth is part of that is part of that. I don't know how to best put it, but that complex of spiritual practices. Um, but yeah, but it's everywhere. You will see them on the side of the road. You will see them up on the sides of mountains, or you'll find them in graveyards, or often at the front of graveyards. And they're very much in that same vein of these liminal spirits, which can traverse through any aspect of creation, and they have this intimate connection with the dead. So for me, when I was studying magic, I was studying the Greek Magical Papyri and learning how all these magical technologies function. I cast my eyes to Japan where I live, and I see this same technology everywhere. And oh, well, here it's just a living tradition. It's just
Right,
natural for people.
right.
It's not something that you have to learn from a book or be nervous to practice, or like you said,
Yeah,
it's not necessarily a transgressive act to
right,
perform necromancy. In fact, it's so common that it's just considered normal. But they wouldn't call it necromancy as you and I
right.
might do. And they certainly wouldn't say do a coercive conjuration.
You
So
know,
it's less aggressive in that sense, but yeah.
here's the thing though. Here's the thing though, because I hear what you're saying. And I do think, that often with the word coercive triggers people. But, when you're sleeping and your spouse turns on the lights and says, "Aren't you supposed to be at work?" You think we wake up and say, "Oh my God, you're right." Well, that's a coercive act, right? You wouldn't have woken except for her words and the light being flicked on, right? If you're at a party and someone calls your name front, first, and last across a busy room, and you turn to see who it is, well, that's a coercive act. They literally forced you to turn. Yeah, you could have decided not to turn your head, but of course you'll turn your head. Who's calling your full name across the room? The same thing if someone whistles across the street and you turn your head. They the coercive tactics in the PGM, are often to attract the attention of the deity, to convince it that you're worthy of their attention, to call forth them to be fully present to the working. to help them understand what's needed, and then, yes, to bid them to do it. But ideally, if you've chosen wisely, the power that you're calling, whether it's the dead or a god or a daimon, you're calling upon them to perform a function which is native to their nature. You're calling upon them to perform something they love to do. If you're a firefighter and your life is fighting fires, you don't mind the phone call at 3 a.m. that says there's a house blazing down the street. You live for that call. So, yes, the chief woke you up. And yes, his instructions, grab your stuff, we need you. He is requiring your attention. But there's a sense of joy in the right kind of person that this is what they live for. This is their profession. They want to put out the fire. They want to save the cat. They want to help the old person make it out of there.
Mm.
Now, if the chief calls in at 3 a.m. and says, I want you to paint my garage, that person is going to have a very different emotional response to that. And I think that's part of why when we say a coercive conjuration of the gods, although it to the outsider it may seem like bullying beings that don't want to be bullied, really what we're talking about is freeing them to follow their own natures in ways that fate may not have dictated. The hymn to the waning moon, which is a conjuration of Hekate Selene, which I know you're well familiar with, says, "Thrice bound goddess, free yourself." What a strange thing to say, right? To say to Hekate, thrice bound. Why would a goddess be thrice bound? And I suggest it's because what could bind the gods? They say, the men fear the gods fear fate. The triple fates, destiny, determined in ancient minds not only the fortunes of every mortal, but also of every god. There were things that were meant to happen and things that were not meant to happen. And the idea was that mortals, without immortal help, couldn't really change the things that were meant to happen and not meant to happen, but neither could gods. They had a function as well, and a fate as well, and a destiny as well. And gods, too, had relationships and lovers and breakups and died and suffered. And this idea that the gods, too, were bound by fate, thrice bound by the three fates. So when you call upon Hekate in the spell and say, thrice bound goddess, free yourself, whirl up from darkness and do such and such, you're helping through the magical art to break the chains of destiny that bind even Hekate in that moment and say, basically, come here, freak, get in the car. We're going to have an adventure. And she responds because, of course, the adventure is something that she's very excited to do because it's within her jurisdiction and it's of her nature and it's on brand for her. It's part of what she loves to do. And the only reason she's not doing it already is because the fates dictated that wasn't to happen. But tonight's the fates have a losing hand and you have a winning one because you have the spell and you have the conjuration and you step into the feet of the creator God and you call forth the allies and beings and say, this will be. And those powers, if you choose wisely, eagerly come to your service, coerced to come, of course, but also delighted to be freed of the bonds that bind even them in order to change fate in a way that's consistent with your working. And so I would just put that in that, while most people squawk and wave off the idea of coercive magic, which is, of course, the hallmark of Egyptian, sorcery, it comes from a place of wanting to defy destiny, not just for yourself, but for the deities and powers that are your patrons, that are ultimately your parentage. They believed we were children of the gods, and you had patron gods that were of you. Scholars would be patrons of Thoth, and warriors patrons of Seth or whomever. And the idea that you called upon these powers to say, let's change fate. You want to do it, and I want to do it, and we have the means to reweave this pattern. And so there's something deliciously cooperative and collaborative. And if it is transgressive, it's not necessarily against the being you're, quote, coercing, as it is against the general pattern. And it's worth keeping in mind, too, back then, the word fate was a four-letter word to people back then. It was the F word, right? Most people thought of fate as a negative thing. You were fated, most of us, to be born poor. We were fated to die young. We were fated to struggle and be hungry much of the time. We were fated to be like a leaf blown in the wind of the mischance and illness and politics and people more powerful than us that exploited us and all that. Fate was a hard thing. You sought to escape fate by participating in the mysteries, whether it was the Eleusinian mysteries or the mysteries of Dionysus or the mysteries of Osiris or the mysteries of Eleusis or Mithras or whatever. So there was an attempt to escape fate through initiation, mysteries, and magic. And that's sort of a missing piece of the puzzle that in the West, at least, we often miss, is that, your destiny wasn't considered to be by default a great thing. And
Mm.
so to escape or change it was considered to be a brave and a good thing to attempt to do.
Yeah, wonderfully put. Thank you for clarifying that distinction because it's a really important one. But yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you. Um, Moving back now to your spell, um, I am a huge fan of magically enchanting food and specifically with breaking bread with spirits. Your spell with the Marigold has the sorcerer eat the petals of the flower before the final phase of the operation begins. And then at the end, you describe the concoct. Sorry, you create a concoction from the petals and turn it into a tea. Uh, could you tell us a little about the historical accounts of eating such magically enchanted materia?
You know, it's interesting, but I think every tradition has a different basis. But for instance, in Greco-Egyptian magic, especially Kemetic Egyptian magic, it's very oral. It's very oral. It's of the mouth, not just Thoth declaring the initial reality and the words escaping from his lips, becoming the things which he proclaims, but Pharaoh would often declare, he would spit upon his enemies, and that spit would be a curse, or he would spit upon his allies or friends, as would uh, as would Muhammad in the Islamic tradition, and their spit would be a blessing. There was constant references in magical texts, like the coffin text, of devouring your enemies, of eating them. You take on a form of a lion spiritually. You devour other magicians. You devour your foes. You're an eater. You would say literally, I cook their bones, I put them in their mouth, I chew them, I swallow them. Their power is no more, their power is within me. It was constant references to licking, to spitting, to eating, to chewing, to devouring. It's of the mouth, right? And so that that tradition that we are basically, you kind of eat or be eaten, consume or be consumed. If you're not at the table, you're on the plate. That's kind of part of the attitude of this magic. You have to be bold and brave. You have to be sort of an apex predator or else you're prey. And it may seem kind of hyper masculine or macho, but really what it means is stepping into an active role where you decide to be the decider as opposed to be one for whom it is decided by other people. And so it's a very active but very specific to that region. But so oral magic, eating magic, devouring magic is very much of that system. So in this case, there's a much milder, a much milder version where you take these marigold leaves, which you've collected sort of ritually and carried with you throughout the day, and you boil them in a tea and you drink the tea. And the idea is, of course, that you incorporate into your body that solar association and virtue of those petals, which are golden colored, which follow the sun, which are named for Mary, which have an inherent beauty that's enlightening and enlivening, and that you, by drinking it through what Fraser would have called the concept of contagion, that you become more solar, that you become more pure, that you become more bright, like the magical voice Agla, that you become a shining, flashing, brilliant, golden, beautiful, pure being, and that makes you more likely to be host to beautiful, pure beings, solar beings, and more capable of seeing or witnessing or intuiting beautiful, pure solar beings. So we take within ourselves that which is of the power we wish to call forth, and that makes us a more appropriate host, for it to take roost in. And
Mm,
so, excuse me, that was the concept between this idea of creating a tea of the marigolds.
mm. Yeah, there's something. just so intimate about that idea of consuming something with the spirit or having some kind of relationship with the food itself in
Mm,
relation to the sorcerers, the act of sorcery and the spirits, and
yeah,
that coherence that arrives through the manipulation of that food and of the eating of that food or the preparation even of that food.
yeah.
I just think it's something that's it's just incredibly powerful to participate in. But we also have for instance, like the Eucharist in the Roman Catholic tradition, which has that sort of um, transcendent quality to it. There's something about the eating of the wafer and the drinking of the wine and being the flesh and the blood of Jesus Christ. Um, is there anything more to say uh, the the consuming or the food and the breaking of bread that might have, how could I say it? It might be the act is itself an act of sorcery. The consuming of a specific thing is the act.
Oh, I think so. I think that's well put. I mean, I think it's like that old British phrase, the king is dead, long live the king. When you eat the host, you devour the god, but then the god lives within you. It's born again. It's like it's like Ceridwen in the Celtic mythology turning into a hen and eating the kernel that is the hero, and then the hero is born through her body and becomes himself again. I think by devouring something, we become it. There's that old story also from the Celtic mythology of you know, of the Celtic god who kills the hound of Hulan, and then he becomes Cuchulainn. He becomes what he destroys, the hound of Hulan, in much the same way that when Apollo kills the python, he then has to establish the temple which is honors, Python, and which his priestess is called the Pythoness, and at Delphi, and then honors it afterwards. We devour it and then we become it. It's like that T-shirt Axl Rose wore, "Kill your idol," right? We have to wreck the thing. And in some ways, we destroy the old thing and let it become new among us. There's sort of a mystic sense of letting a reiteration occur through our modern contemporary lives. We're not Egyptian priests. We're not Renaissance priests. We're who we are. And so, to some degree, it behooves us to study these traditions and honor them, but it also behooves us to, in a way, destroy them and let them be reborn through us in a modern iteration, in a contemporary. Not that we ignore tradition, but the fact that it has to be relevant to our lives to have meaning. And, your version of a goetic rite might not be the same as a priest's in the year 1400. It would by nature be different. And if I perform the hymn to the waning moon, it will of course be different than it would be than performed by an off-duty Kemetic scribe. And that's just natural. That's the way it should be. To pretend otherwise is to engage in cosplay, to pretend we're something we're not. We are who we are. We live when we do. We adopt these non-traditional, non-mainstream traditions of magic in order to bring something to our lives that they're missing, which for many is a sense of wonder and awe and an opportunity to encounter the divine through an unmediated exercise. And to do that, it's risky. You have to sort of push yourself into places and situations and take on forms that are not natural to us and that are in a way blasphemous if you come from a traditional system. But you have to open yourself up to the divine in ways that may not be normal. Your encounter with the divine may not be a glowing vision of a deity that looks cinematic. It may be sort of a panic response with your heart racing and sweaty palms and a sudden flash in your mind of a song, a fragment of a song that you haven't thought of in years. That's an epiphany. It might be a car driving by the next day and and you hear something, a snatch of conversation which answers a question that you'd wondered. It might be a sense of, this intuitive realization that you've been trying to avoid for a long time that suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. It's impossible to say. But these epiphanies, these, God appearances, these spiritual revelations, when they occur, often require us to rethink our relationship to ourselves and to the outer world. And in that, we devour the God and become it, but in a way we are devoured too. and we unbecome and rebecome something that is both less and greater than what we were. And by
Mm,
doing so, we advance towards something that's kind of ineffable and unnameable and eternal, but we become more like it and perhaps less like ourselves and perhaps less like those people that surround us. So as we do it, we become a bit stranger, but also, we become a bit realer in a
mm,
weird way. It's a strange pattern, but one that takes place again and again. And the more magic you do, the more spiritual work you do, you encounter it repeatedly until you begin to recognize the pattern.
mm. Yeah, I love the way you put that when you said that uh, it, it's like it's an act of transformation essentially.
Mm.
You're evolving, changing, growing. Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for talking about your spell so much. It's not a huge spell, but it's so rich in technique and quality. I really think that that's why it deserved this episode, and for us to like sort of break down the components of it and like really get nerdy with it because it's so fascinating to me. But yeah, so you're working as a teacher through the Blackthorn School. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do through that?
Oh, sure. Right. Well, so I write and I teach class, I lead classes on ancient magic. I have a 13-week class on Hekate. I have a year-long course called PGM Praxis 1 and a year-long course called PGM Praxis 2, The Kingdom. And these courses are basically ones in which I explore each week. I do videos and PDFs, which include different ancient spells, prayers, rites, rituals, exorcisms, blessings, charms, talisman from ancient times. And I'll read it aloud in the video, and I'll talk about how it might be done, and I'll provide a PDF of it. And then we'll have a group, usually on social media, that's optional, where people can join to talk about what they think of the working and if they tried it, what came of it, share their field notes if they feel so inclined. So these are that's these are things I do in order to sort of to learn more about the magic myself, but also share my own enthusiasm about it and encounter other people, weird like me that want to indulge in these exercises. And it's really exciting. The courses are taken by people from all over the world. We have people from North Africa, France, Russia, Scandinavia, South America, East Asia. It's a wonderful way to meet people from different cultures. And often people will share experiences they have and say, oh, this spell is cool. I live in Romania. Here's something it reminds me of in our local church, or here's a folk tradition in Bulgaria like this, or oh, this is something my grandmother in Brazil would do like this. And you start to see the patterns and you realize that magic isn't just arbitrary, you know, tactics chosen by people that didn't have scientific knowledge, but there's a continuum, thousands of years, thousands of miles apart, people practicing it under the same paradigm for the same reasons. And you start to, it raises the hair on the back of your neck as you realize there's an overall pattern here that seems to be a human universal. And it might have different flavors in different cultures at different times, but the pattern begins to emerge. And it's a pattern that's includes spirits, includes the dead, is hierarchical, is animistic, involves reciprocal relationships and exchanges, and it's very accessible because most of us are involved in reciprocal relationships all the time. That's what we do. If you have a spouse or a best friend, if you still talk to your parents or your kids, if you have a pet, then you're used to reciprocal relationships. You know what it takes to maintain them. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes a bit of compassion and open-mindedness. It takes a bit of being more interested in what their viewpoint is rather than your own, and in a willingness to act on it. And those are really the main skills needed when engaging with other powers because they do involve coming to the table saying, I need you, I want you, I'm worthy of you, I have something you need and you have something I need, and I wish to engage in a dialogue with you. And if you can say those things, then you're capable of performing magic according to the old paradigm and has nothing to do with wishful thinking or imaginary castles in the air, and everything to do with building a relationship with something you can't see, which seems strange, but then many of us live quite far apart from, say, our parents or our siblings. Many of us live quite far apart from the celebrities, that we love, or close friends we once had when we were younger. And we still work to maintain those relationships through reciprocal acts and efforts. So we know what it's like. And many of us have relationships with non-human beings, be they dog, cat, snake, spider, whatever. And we know what that takes as well. And we know that, weirdly, the same things that cause a secure relationship with a human are the same things that cause a secure relationship, for instance, with a snake. And it's, there's stability, a pattern, there's respect, there's the courtesy, there's not startling or discomfiting it, there's understanding its nature, giving it what it desires, and not pushing it beyond the bonds of what it's used to or comfortable with, but also allowing there to be time for it to acclimate to you and you to it, and to admire it, to come to know its own functions, not to make of it something it's not, but to appreciate it on its own terms, and to come to understand that how different it is from you, but also in some ways how similar, and to appreciate the tension between those things.
Mm.
So if you can do that with another creature, you can certainly do it with a spirit.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I will include the link to the Blackthorn School in the description. But do you have any other projects that you're working on at the moment and that you would like to share with us?
Oh, thanks for asking. Well, I show the play I wrote on Valkyrie lore called Sigrid in the Mist, and I also have I have a novel about a mystery that takes place in 1920s El Paso, Juarez, a noir mystery in the tradition of the Maltese Falcon, or other movies like that, which I love, which I'll release soon, which will be part of a charitable effort. And I have another class on the horizon that I'll be teaching soon, but I'll leave people to that until I have it ready for release. But those are the efforts of the things that I'm working on now, and those are the things I'm passionate about. Thank you for asking. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, Jack, thank you for coming on the show today and talking to us about the Marigold and Mary and the PGM and everything else. It's been really wonderful. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's been a pleasure, Matt, and I really appreciate the work you do with Hadean, and I'm very honored to be invited to be on your show. So thank you so much.
That was Jack Grayle, author of The Golden Guest, an essay of sorcerous dream incubation and visionary magic, featured in Hadean Press's Conjure Codex Volume 4. I found Jack to be wonderfully eloquent and passionate about the subjects that we spoke about today. He has such a great style of oration, and I think it's safe to say that his magic very much works through the charm and wit of his voice. Having taken Jack's course on the PGM, I can say that, without doubt, his material is highly valuable for those seeking to learn more about ancient Greco-Egyptian magical practices. I personally gained a great deal from investing my time in his lessons, and so I can't recommend him higher for those interested in developing that aspect of their knowledge base. I really enjoyed listening to Jack discuss the way in which he approaches his work, and getting the opportunity to interview him and nerd out about some of these subjects was just such a pleasure for me. I especially enjoyed the way Jack describes how one should approach the ordeal and how we enter into that mythic space-time as we find ourselves having to overcome adversity. I also really enjoyed the way Jack thinks about beginning our work and how people can get so easily sidetracked or derailed by thinking that they aren't worthy or, that they haven't prepared enough, and how we simply need to take that leap to get started. So I hope people listening take this advice to heart, and if you are in such a situation, consider applying your knowledge to action. Jack has 2 upcoming courses, the first of which is his PGM Praxis 2, The Kingdom, and the second is his 13-week course, Hail Hekate, Walking the Forked Path. Links to both of these courses can be found in the description below. If you have made it this far, then thank you so much for your continued support for Hadean Press and for our global authorship. If you can, please leave us a comment below, like, share, and subscribe for more just like this in the future. Our November episode will see Cadmus return to the podcast. Together we will be discussing his latest work, Learning from Legendary Practitioners, a book I am right in the middle of right now, and I've got to tell you, it is absolutely worth your time. It is going to be such a good book when it's out. Until then, thank you so much. I have been your host, Matt Hadfield, and I will see you all again in the next one.